Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to the May special Superbooth edition of Molten Music Monthly. Kapow! Well, that was Superbooth 2018. It's an enormous throbbing mass of electronic noise-making machines stuffed into a weird Fez building somewhere in Berlin where there are dozens and dozens of stalls and manufacturers and demonstrators and electronic wizardry, nerd head, synth mind, crazy people. Demonstrating stuff, showing stuff, talking deeply about screw sizes and capacitors and resistors and how that noise goes warp and that one goes and that waveform goes ticka 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 and stuff that goes boom 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 sort of that kind of vibe. And within those interconnecting patch cables of sound-making loveliness, there's a whole raft of new things, new products, new boxes that go bing, new things that go, I think I've done enough of that. And all of it accessible to the general public for a few euros. And more often than not, you're getting a demo from the person who actually designed and built the thing. And on top of all that, everyone just seems to be having a bloody good time. So in this month's slightly earlier than usual Molten Monthly, I'm going to be talking about the products and things and bits and pieces that I liked, that inspired me, that I thought were really cool. Now there's tons and tons of stuff at Superbooth. This year more than, it was 5 times bigger than any other year. And there's far too much to talk about. So I'll just try to focus in on the things that really spoke to me in one way or another. Either good or bad, who knows? We'll find out in just a second. So enough talk, let's get on with the talking. So what are we talking about? We have Behringer Cubed, we have Dreadbox releasing a mythical monster. Analogue Solutions get sequencing. ALM had a bunch of stuff. Casper got some feedback. I've fallen in love with Instruo, although I still can't pronounce it. Erica Synths went techno. Elektrofon Clang makes beautiful chords. Befaco are kicked, sliced and burst. AJH gets swarmed. Endorphin go full on hot black Daziato. Yuhi gets all polymorphic. Soulsby get into keyboards. Bastl have cool things. Is it not rocket science? Make envelopes sexy. VPME has some spooky action. Hexinverter gets into our brains. Xaoc puts envelopes into harmonic clusters. The Black Corporation finally reveals the Comigi. IK Multimedia get into hardware monosynths. Sequential Circuits release a hybrid that nobody really asked for. And your grandmother turned up late to the party, but looking fabulous. But first, software. Noise Engineering weren't really there at Superbooth, but they were there on the propeller head stand. Yes, that's right. Noise Engineering have released a couple of rack extensions of their very, very cool modules. Really didn't see that coming. I mean, there's lots of other places where you kind of expect software versions of things to appear, like the new VCF rack or Softube modular. But as a rack extension, you suddenly think, oh yeah, Reason's actually a very, very modular friendly place. And so Noise Engineering have decided to release 3 of their modules into this format, incredibly. And they've been awesome, like you'd expect them to be. And the 3 in question are the Simulus Iteratas, Manis Iteratas, and Loquelic Iteratas Percido, I don't know, I never know whether I say these things right. Now they look super weird in the rack extension format because it's kind of sideways and strange, but they still retain, you know, the look and feel, I think, of the original modules. But the important thing is that they sound bloody brilliant. Stephen from Noise Engineering has done some videos on how they work, and it's actually the clearest explanation I've ever had of any of their modules ever. I was immediately able to go back to my Eurorack where I have a Basimilus and was able to use it better simply because I'd watched the demonstration of the rack extension. What is it about demo videos where they sometimes completely fail to actually explain what something does? Whereas this one, perfect. As far as I can tell, they sound absolutely amazing. They've got all the CV controls stuffed in on the back is the way that Reason does it. And so you can just work them directly into everything that Reason does. And if you're not familiar with these modules, then the Basimilus is a 6-operator drum noise making machine, but can also accidentally create sort of leads and bass at the same time. It's very pitchy. The Manis is kind of like a dirtier, nastier, grungier version of it that has knobs like profundity, whereas Loquelic is all about sort of space farts and laser beams. It's essentially a complex oscillator that makes a heck of a load of noise. Well, they all sound fabulous. They're there, they're going to be available in a synth bundle or individually, I believe, but they're not going to cost anywhere near as much as the modules do. And it's a fantastic way to get some of that crazy noise engineering stuff into Reason on your laptop without having to do any of the hardware stuff. It's awesome. Now, of course, everyone's going to ask, well, where's the VST version? Well, apparently that's in the works, but I think going with the rack extension for Reason is a really interesting and good idea. Well done. Go and check out the videos about them on the Noise Engineering website, and you'll find them in the Propellerhead store very soon. Well, we can't ignore Behringer. We can't. They have firmly wedged themselves into the legacy and the mind and the community of this wonderful world of hardware synthesis in which we find ourselves. And at Superbooth, they had managed to keep under wraps 3 huge announcements. And so we had the long anticipated clones of the Roland TR-808, the Roland SH-101, and the ARP Odyssey. Now, I think this really could be a turning point for Behringer, and maybe our attitude towards Behringer as well. I mean, who knows? I mean, attitudes are what we have. I don't know how easy it is to change someone's idea towards something once they've made that up. And so arguments about whether Behringer is good for the community, bad for the community, those will go on and rage endlessly. It doesn't really matter. My view of it keeps changing around because they do different things, and I like being surprised. I really do, and this is one of those times. I mean, we've had the Model D and other bits and pieces. They had the Pro 1 also on display, which looks really very cool. However, because of their size and form factor, because of some of the fiddliness of the knobs, it's quite easy to dismiss them because they're different, they're small, they're fitted in with other things, and they're not really harking back to the days of classic synthesizers. They are perhaps in terms of sound, but not in terms of the actual hardware. Whereas these 3 babies are very different. They have gone full on chunky synthesizer. I don't know, maybe they just decided to do it right this time. Maybe it's the criticism of the small, sort of fiddly, cramped control panels on these other units and makes them think, sod it, we're just going to do it for real. I don't know. Whatever it is, it's a flipping good idea because it allows us to finally look at a piece of Behringer gear as a serious replacement, as a serious clone, not a clone in a smaller box, a proper clone of a big clone of a thing with a big, I think I've laboured that enough. And so it just makes it far more difficult to really find criticism. So we have the RD808, which is obviously a clone of the TR808, and it's fabulous. It's big, it's chunky, it will go whoomp on your desktop. It's got everything you expect it to have, all the sounds, all the outputs, all the buttons, the rhythm composer section, but they've also built in other things like a compressor and like a filter, solo mute on each track, comprehensive MIDI and USB implementation. It's the sort of updated 808 that Roland should have built. And then we have the MS-101, which is of course a clone of the SH-101. And they've taken that form factor and replicated it beautifully. This is not like a boutique version in a little small thing with fiddly stuff. No, this is a full-size jobby and a proper hard bit of plastic with a proper size keyboard, all the proper size bits and pieces. It's great. They've improved the sequencer, they've dragged out more waveforms from the original oscillator, stuck in FM and extra wave shaping, and they're going to do it in all the colors. It will come with a free mod grip, so you can do your whole keytar action. It looks like a genuine synthesizer. And finally, they've got the Odyssey, which is a clone of the ARP Odyssey. This is something that Corp have done very recently, but Corp made this kind of stupid error of sticking on tiny weeny keys. I mean, Roland have done the same thing with their boutique range in that you can get the little keyboard for it, but it's a crappy little keyboard. Corp did the same with their Odyssey. Then they did a larger one with proper keys for 3 times the price. It doesn't make any sense. So Behringer, whoop, here you go, Odyssey, bam, full-size keys, everything you need. We've stuck some effects in, we've stuck blue LEDs on it, we've made enhancements and changes and little things that we think would be good USB and MIDI implementation, stuff like that, which is exactly what Korg should have done. So ultimately, I think the way I get my head around this is that Behringer are just stepping in and doing what these other manufacturers should have done, because we're all fed up with waiting for Roland to produce an SH-101 again, or to bring out a TR-808 again. Yeah, they've done the boutique version, but we all know the boutique versions are essentially software. And although they sound amazing, they are small and annoyingly fiddly. I don't know why they tied themselves into this form factor, because it's I think, although we all want that, we want those sounds, we want access to those sounds in a piece of hardware, and they certainly do have their place, they are not really fulfilling or meeting the desires of the synthesizer community to have proper bits of hardware. So Behringer are doing that. I mean, they would have no market if Roland had done it first. They would have no market if Korg had not stupidly inflated the price of the Odyssey just by putting on larger keys. We have no pricing yet for these 3 new synths, but you've got to imagine that they're going to be flipping competitive. And it just boggles my mind that people like Roland and Korg and Yamaha as well haven't kind of got to grips with that yet. And that's not to say that Roland and Korg aren't doing great stuff. They are. They've brought new stuff in, new polyphonic synthesizers. There's new System 500 modules from Roland. They're doing a lot of good stuff, but they've just missed the synthesizer zeitgeist on cool, chunky, hardware analog synths. And Behringer is quite happy to fill that gap. It's really interesting listening to the Midas engineers talk about how they put the thing together and how the design process works, and you get a sense that they are absolutely having the time of their lives. And no sense that they're just sort of money-grabbing cheap knockoffs. But we should see them all later in the year, so put them all on your Christmas list. Dreadbox had one of the most interesting and beautiful looking new synthesizers at the show. It's called Medusa. It's designed with Polyend, who make that lovely desktop light up buttony sequencer thingy. And as far as I can gather, they kind of had a bit of a design meeting where they said, you know that Medusa you're designing that's all kind of orange and squidgy? Well, can we just make it beautiful? And Dreadbox went, all right then. And Polyend said, could we stick like this grid controller on the side? They go, yeah, all right then. How about some hybrid oscillators? Yeah, all right then. So it just sort of ballooned into this awesome product, which is great. I mean, we're all going to benefit from that. So on the synthesizer side, it has 3 analog oscillators and 3 digital oscillators. It has 5 looping envelopes, 5 LFOs, a filter and a mixer to blend all of the waveforms together. It has a preset engine and is capable of producing 3 or 6 voice paraphonic sounds. Now, a lot of the same controls are used over and over again for each of these things. You've only really got 1 LFO with 5 buttons. So there's a little bit of kind of buttonization. It's not all just one control per everything, but that's okay. They've kind of embraced the digital nature of it, and they've got a little screen that's telling you what's going on. And so it should be relatively easy to follow, but it's not your standard 1 button, 1 knob does 1 thing analog synth. This is a hybrid. It's got a lot of digital stuff going on inside, which gives it a lot of versatility and flexibility. Sometimes that's at the expense of a completely open control panel. But honestly, when watching it in action, it doesn't look that hard to navigate. On the left-hand side is this grid of 16 by 16 pads, which all light up and are expressive, and you can play it like a keyboard, you can play it like a sequencer, you can use it for modulation, all sorts of stuff. It's like they said, let's just stick everything in there. And so they did, and it allows you to play it in very unconventional ways and to use a different sound on every step within the sequence, and different modulation and different parameters all being played and interplayed all over the place. It looks like you could create an awful lot of stuff on this machine. It sort of unexpectedly overflows into a bit more of the Novation Circuit sort of territory. Probably not for the purists, but for the rest of us who just like a load of stuff stuffed into something, then I think that's pretty awesome. They also had the Erebus 3. Now, they retired the Erebus 2 a little while ago, and then they brought us this little Erebus, which you could build as a DIY kit, which was very cool. And then suddenly they bring in version 3. Now, version 3 brings in a brand new oscillator, slap bag in the middle, which can be a noisy, soundy oscillator. It can also be a modulator. And they're sort of gone heavily into how the 3 oscillators now interplay and modulate and mess with each other. And that's very, very interesting. I mean, they've kept the character and the vibe of the original Erebus, which is great, including the echo, which I think is vitally important. They've put in a lot more patch points to make it more connectable to everything else. You can route stuff in, stuff out, get it to play in a bigger world. So I think it's an interesting upgrade to a little synth that I've always wanted to have. And it's going to stay around the same sort of price, so I think everybody wins. Analogue Solutions make that wonderful fuse box things and these lots of desktop-y type effects and cool stuff. They generally just make achingly cool analog gear. Well, now they have a sequencer, a big sort of fat desktop thing with 3 rows of 16 knobs and CV patch points and strange things over here and some more knobs and stuff. The demos at the show weren't particularly inspiring, but I think in there you can grasp that there's something very cool going on. Now, these 3 rows of rotary encoders can be assigned to whatever you like. You could have the top one as pitch and then another one as filter cutoff, another one as some kind of envelope. And they also double up as gate sequencers as well, because they have lights in the little top of the knob that you turn on and off that does stuff. I mean, they were talking about how it sort of comes from the patternator that's in the fuse box, in that there was a quick and easy way to generate patterns using just a handful of knobs that adjusted and changed the complexity of things. And this sequencer very much does that, and there's some dedicated knobs down there to change patterns and to very, very quickly change the way that something is sounding. I mean, their intention is for this to be very much in the performance space. There's also a little sort of weird triangle-based sort of touch keyboard of some kind to also enter in notes or to trigger stuff or to change stuff. I reckon there's a whole load of stuff going on in this sequencer that perhaps wasn't communicated brilliantly in some of the demos that we saw, but it's still a prototype. They've still got the front panel to sort out. I think there's still a little bit of time to go in development, and it just looks to me like this is going to be a really interesting box to play with. Are they called ALM? Are they called Busycircuits? I'm not sure, but they had a bunch of new modules to show at Superbooth. The first one is a yet-to-be-named sampler, where the idea seemed to be just to make it as damn simple as humanly possible. A lot of the samplers we see in Eurorack are hideously complicated. Well, not hideously complicated, perhaps just overly excited, like the Morphogenie. What the heck is going on there? Whereas this just wants to sample something, play it back. Sample something, play it back. It automatically detects the start and end point, automatically sets it all up, ready to go. 8 channels of it, overlooping on top of each other. It's kind of a sampler for people who just want to get on with it. And I thought that was really cool, although I think it looks a bit weird. The layout is a bit sort of scattered all over the place, and I'm just really not sure about those colours. But in the same style, unfortunately, they also had a wavetable oscillator, which looked quite interesting, which had some extra pulse width modulation sort of designed or based upon the Roland Alpha Juno, and a remarkably named Quaid Megaslope 5-stage envelope thingy, which actually has a lot more in it than just being an envelope. It's also loopable and becomes an LFO and does sort of slope and glide and portamento. I think you kind of have to see it a bit more like an unruly version of the mutable stages. So that could get very interesting. Electronic music performer and synth designer Peter Edwards has been kind of pulled and welcomed into the Bastl family. He's already been doing stuff for them, but now he's releasing like a new line of crazy performance orientated Eurorack modules. The first is called Dark Matter, which I think is kind of a bit of an overused name for something. It knocks around a lot, but anyway, it's kind of a feedback module. The idea is you stuff something in, you mix it about, bit of EQ, bit of limiting, and then feed the bugger back into each other until it creates some kind of gnarly sort of noise. It takes your lovely pure signal and bends it into something more intense and thick and brutal. It has an envelope follower that can fade in the feedback, and a nice crossfader to control the depth. It sounds completely nuts. He had another module which seemed to be under development called the Party Mix, which is a 4-channel mixer which has some sort of drive and coloration into it, so you just pump it all up and then the party starts. And then there's something slightly weird called the Domain Shifter, which appears to generate digital values in response to some kind of signal. But I didn't really understand that one. But I'm loving the dark feed matter thingy. There's something about the look, the function, the intentionality, the attitude, and the vibe that comes off these Instruo modules that I find completely captivating. They're just gorgeous, but they've also been quite frustrating because you would kind of get glimpses of them on social media and then sort of like hurriedly head over to the website and never find anything that they seem to be talking about. You understood that there was kind of this invitation to get in touch if you wanted them to build something for you, but I never really knew what it was I wanted them to build or how much it would cost. I would much rather window shop and check these things out and consider it and like stroke my beard and think about it. And the lack of information on their website kind of denied me the opportunity to do that. So you just had to to look at the glimpses of the Harmonic and this oscillator or that filter or that mixer thing and go, ooh, that's really, then it's gone. Then it's gone. I wonder how much, oh, I don't know. However, they are starting to ramp up production now and things are beginning to happen. The website has a bit more information about a few more modules, although they are still working on a brand new web shop, which should hopefully fill that Instruo hole that I have in my life. So at the show, they had Harmonic, which we've seen before. We've seen it a lot, but it wasn't on the website until just now. But it's a wonderful 4-channel chord generating machine. And it seems to create just lovely quantized chords in a very musical, diatonic way. You can mess around with the voicing and the chord type and sweep your way through modalities in really just delicious ways. There's like a whole world of complex harmonic progressions going on. I would love to have one of these things. Don't think I have the room for it or quite enough oscillators yet, but it's something that I aspire to. They also had 3 new oscillators. First they had Toner, which is a more simple sawtooth based oscillator with inbuilt wave folding. Now it was interesting, there's a lot of this inbuilt wave folding going on and each one of them seemed to think that they had invented the idea of putting wave folding into an oscillator. And it's nice that they all believe that about themselves. They also had the TSL, which was smaller than the Toner, but somehow more complex. It's based on a triangle core and has 5 separate waveform outputs, including a pulse width modulation output that crossfades between 2 waves and the inbuilt wavefolder. And then there was a much bigger CSL, which seems to take the Toner and the TSL and stuff them into a single module and then make them cross-modulate each other like some kind of crazy oscillating hybrid. That could get very interesting, although they're only releasing that in much smaller numbers. They also had a new filter built on the ARP 2500 1047 resonant filter and a sort of incomplete mixer stroke CV generator stroke sequencer stroke whatever else we could think about doing with it type slider fader box thingy. I mean, all of it, the aesthetic of it is simply beautiful, and you could very easily find yourself having a whole row of Instruo modules and just feeling extremely happy about it. Also on the website is a project which is under development called Symphonium, which is kind of like a Harmonic on steroids. There's 8 channels of quantization going on, and it could run your entire rig and give you control over massive amounts of transposition of chordal changes, chord progressions and pattern-based stuff. It's a really great video on there, which is fascinating on how this kind of modular brain is going to give you a whole load more performance flexibility. I find myself almost buying Instruo modules all the time, and if I could actually say the word, I probably would. But at some point, they will be mine. Erica Synths have put together a phenomenally banging modular techno system. They've filled it with all their new drum modules, they're stuck in an acid bass voice, a drum computer, a bunch of handy little mixers. There's 15 modules in all inside this sort of custom built case. This includes their new sample drum. I wonder if you can guess what that does. Yes, it's a drum sample, sample drum. You put drum samples on a card, stick it in, and it plays samples of drums. Although obviously it can play samples of anything. It has 2 channels of CV, so you can play 2 things at once, and a little screen for selecting your samples. On the analog drum front, there's now bass, snare, toms, hi-hat, and clap, all with the usual tuning and decay knobs. It's like a killer drum kit all in a row. There's a distortion module called a dual drive, and 3 new, quite small mixers. The key one is a 7-channel drum mixer, designed for the drums obviously, with 7 knobs on it, and also a compressor. There's a light version which takes up a lot less room and kind of hides the compressor in the background somewhere, but it's still there. And then there's a stereo mixer which offers 4 channels of panning. The dual FX module is really very cool. It kind of takes the guts of the Pico DSP and sticks it into a more proper sized module, and 2 channels of them completely independently. I love my Pico DSP, but it's just not very knobbable, whereas this looks like a fantastic upgrade because you can get a lot more into it. And finally, there's the baseline analog synth voice, which is an entire voice, including the filter from the acid box, and a wonderfully labelled knob called Beef. The drums are of course run by their fabulously mechanically keyboarded drum computer, and the whole system contains everything you need to blow the roof off your local techno club. My only concern is that in all of this kind of blackness, in a gig performance situation, are you actually going to find the right module that you're going for? It should all be out by the summer. Now, hidden away in the deepest, darkest corner of the show on an unassuming rack was a fascinating little module from Elektrofon called Clang. Now, Clang is quite amusing as a word, I suppose, and doesn't really do anything to explain what this module does. Clang, do I have to say it like that every time? I know. Clang is a chord generator, a beautiful chord generator. It immediately caught my eye purely because of the aesthetic. It just looks flipping brilliant. I mean, we're very much used to silver and black and lights and knobs and stuff. And so when something comes along which is just a little bit different, this isn't massively different, it's just coloured differently. And then it has this round screen, which gives the impression of some kind of watch or a clock face or maybe a compass. And just the whole look of it just took me by surprise. And I think it's a beautiful thing. The aesthetic is fabulous. I mean, I know we can have these arguments over, well, it's the sound that's important and it's the guts that are important, the technology that's important. Yes, yes. But the look of something is important also. I mean, anyone who's designing or putting together a Eurorack system takes into account what it's going to look like. It may be a hodgepodge of horribleness, and that's fine. Or it might all be hand painted. That's fine also. It might all be silver, might all be black. Whatever. But the look, the aesthetic, the way the interface works, the design involved in that, I think is as important as what it actually does. Although all these things are tied into each other, because if it's a piece of crap, then it's a piece of crap regardless of how good it looks. But the Clang is a chord generator. You dial in chords, you've got 4 knobs, 4 notes, you dial it in and these arms swing around the clock face to pick out the notes that you are choosing. And that then generates this chord. It's actually really very simple. Nothing more flashy than that. It can store 100 chords, so you can set up chord progressions and step through them via CV or manually. And the clock face moves around to show you what chord is currently active. It's just a lovely thing. It's not complicated. There's no menus. It's just one knob does one thing. And there you have it. And of course, that would be great into some kind of polyphonic Eurorack, the same as a Harmonag would be. Although I didn't really see it as that. I saw it more as a way of transposing 4 different sequences all at the same time, using it for controlling CV in different ways at different times. And so actually seeing it as a chord generator is to perhaps a little bit of a narrow view, when you can use it for all sorts of good stuff. Now, the designer, Rune Warhus, brought it along as a prototype, just to try it out, to see whether this sort of thing would work and whether people would be interested. Well, I kind of believe that people have. So now he's wandered off to work out how on earth can he produce this thing in any kind of significant numbers. But he hopes to keep the price under 300 euros and he hopes to have more information on it very, very soon. And for me, I think it was one of the standout modules of the show. Now, I like Befaco because they have this thing with kits. I don't have any of their stuff yet, but I'm planning to do an entire row of DIY modules, and undoubtedly a whole bunch of that is going to be their stuff. And they had 3 new modules at the show. The first one is called Kickle, and it's a kick drum, but it's a kick drum that sounds like the kind of kick drum you're always trying to find on other modules, which I really quite like. So I've got a Pico drum and I'm always trying to dial up that same kind of kick drum, the doom one, the one that's always there. I don't want 80s kicks or 90s kicks, I want the doom doom one, that analogy one of kind of an overdriven 808, I suppose. So this is what that's all about, just producing that one very pleasing, very familiar kick sound. That's what we want. Then they have the Muck Slicer. Now this, I'm not entirely sure they got my head around it. It's kind of a sequential signal processor. So it could be a sequential switch or a sequencer or a gator effect or all sorts of different things. I don't know. You can plug 8 things in and get 1 thing out, or 1 thing in and get 8 things out. And you've got these sliders to change things. You can chain them up to create 16 of them or 32 of them or whatever. And I'm not explaining it very well, but it seemed to be really interesting. And then they had Burst, which is a burst generator. Stick something in and it goes burst of CVs coming out. And it's the sort of thing that I feel I need in my rack. You can get up to 64 triggers coming out, and there's all sorts of controls over the distribution of those, the timing, the probability, which is great for creating and generating ratchets and delays and weird multiplications and polyrhythms. Alan Hall makes classic looking synth modules. Very classic, very serious, absolutely no funny business whatsoever. And he had a couple of interesting modules on show. One of them was called the Wave Swarm, which was a dual channel 6 oscillator swarming box You stick a signal in, you turn all these knobs up, and it sounds like 6 oscillators, or you can chain them together and it'll sound like 12 oscillators. So it takes your simple waveform and creates this enormously, wonderfully thick soup of detuned oscillators around itself to make it, I guess, sound more interesting. The other was called the V-shape, which was a kind of a wave bending idea. I mean, we're all familiar with pulse width modulation, the way you can move a square wave around. You can't do that with triangle and sine waves as such, but you can with AJH's V-shape, because rather than moving it across like that, it sort of tilts it, and you get this very similar sort of sound modulation going on as you do with pulse width modulation. It also built in some distortion and some wavefolding. Wavefolding's in everything this year. And I thought it was just really good, really solid, really proper sounding, and somehow kind of serious. Highly anticipated on the run-up to Superbooth was the Endorphin Bluk Noir. Their modules are usually bright yellow and full of colour, and so it was very interesting to see how their website and everything else transformed into this darkness as they took some kind of step forward into a whole different palette. Well, a palette of black on black with black. Now, when I saw the teaser, I kind of made the assumption that it was going to be a synthesizer, it was going to be some kind of melodic thing, and I was completely wrong. It's a 7-channel drum machine. It's kind of very similar to what Erica's Synths have done, but they've put it into a single module with a slightly different drum choice. You've got kick and snare, of course, but then you've got tambourine and metal bar alongside hi-hat, and round it off with a cymbal. There's no toms, no clap, but instead you've got these different sort of metallic sort of sounds. All the sounds are synthesized using digital noise with spectrum animation injected into analog circuits. Nice. They have effects built in from the grand central module, and that includes a bunch of reverb, delay, and kind of a freezer looper thing. There are individual outputs as well as mix outputs, tuning and decay, and all the usual sort of controls you imagine you would find over percussion noises. And there are cool things like thrust and flaps, which apparently is the filter, and throttle, which kind of wave shapes you from more organic to more metallic sounds. It's essentially a banging box of synthesized drummy goodness in a single 30 HP module with useful things like effects and mixing and filtering all built in. I guess in some ways it's kind of cheating at modular and having it all in the single module, but for someone like me who often finds the whole drum experience in modular a little bit sort of messy and confusing, then this could be an ideal solution. As Heckman of You, he usually builds kind of ace software synthesizers, but now he's having a go at Eurorack. And of course, we all assumed that it would be some kind of synthesizer, because that seems to be where his talents lie, but no, this was not that at all. It was a strange utility. It was a weird sort of 4x4 matrix of crossing over possibilities and interconnected weirdness with which you could do a whole ton of stuff. It was kind of like an ultimate CV signal manipulating module. It was very colourful, it all sort of lit up different ways, and you can push the knobs down to sort of evoke different modes and allow you to create the routing between one knob and 4 knobs on the other side, or 2 knobs to 2 knobs, and so you could mix different things through or combine CVs in interesting and exciting ways. And then he just seemed to build more and more stuff into it, like quantizing, like scales, and sample and hold, and gliding, sequential switching, ADSR envelopes, looping envelopes, sample and hold. Everything was just stuffed into it. I mean, it's still a prototype, it's still working out what all the modes are necessarily going to be and how they're going to work, but it's like in a quite small module, allows you to radically sort of redefine what all of your CV is doing. It's quite interesting. Soulsby synthesizers had a whole bunch of new stuff going on. They've kind of evolved from the Megatron into the Megatron 2 and the Multitron, which is the keyboard thing. Now, this is another one of those things where manufacturers talk about their gear is not always the best person to be speaking about it, purely because they're talking about stuff that they're kind of assuming that you know and understand. And with a lot of the demos of the Soulsby stuff, I was just sort of going, anyway, he kept talking about voice cards and bits and pieces and things behind the scenes and 16 oscillators and 24 filters and I don't know. Anyway, There's a new version of the Megatron. The Megatron is an 8-bit synthesizer, which different sort of firmwares you can stick in to make it sound like anything that you want. And that's what he's been doing with his desktop units and also his Eurorack units. We're now on to the Megatron 2. The 2 seems to mean there's 2 of them in there. So you've got twice as much as everything going on, but from a similar firmware and software base. In the big keyboard version, you have 8 of them inside. So you're layering up on polyphony, layering up on versatility, all sorts of stuff going on. He's retained all of the CV connectivity that he got into with the Eurorack modules that he produced last year. And kind of what you end up with is this sort of massively complex and versatile polyphonic keyboard that you can make do pretty much anything. You could have a couple of channels of it as percussion, as drums. You have a couple of channels as a 4-voice polyphonic synthesizer, something else doing chiptune, sort of 8-bit stuff, noises going on over here. There's a whole lot of stuff in there. But what it really needs is someone to go, it does all this, and show it off. Whereas talking about it, because it's digital technology and it's all behind the scenes, it's not particularly exciting or fun to hear about. You just want to have it demonstrated. So he needs to get someone in just to write demos to give us a bigger idea of what they can do, because I think the potential of this keyboard is huge. There's a whole world of sound going on in there. We just need to get to know about it. Bastl had a couple of new things alongside the Casper Electronics sort of tie-in. They had their own stuff going on. The first thing was a polyphonic MIDI to CV converter. They're not the most exciting things in the world, but there are all sorts of creative and interesting things built into it to the way that it allocates voices. They've called it the 1983 because that's when MIDI first appeared, I think. And somehow this is a future throwback to the reflection of the past we never had, or something. But anyway, it's super cool, and you can run 4 oscillators from it. And another key feature is that they have a tuning circuit built in. So it will listen to your oscillators and then adjust the CV in order to keep them all in tune, which is extremely useful. The other module they have is called Timbre, which is the idea of adjusting the timbre of your sound. See what they did there? It's quite clever, really. It offers some wave driving on one side and some wave folding on the other. So it folds and it drives and it mashes and it mixes it back together and gives you a more complex waveform out. Awesome. This is not rocket science. Recently showed us a wobbler, which is an LFO with a nice light on it that swings about and shows you what's going on. Their next module is called the Edge Cutter, which is a remarkably awesome name for an envelope generator. And the first thing I like about it is that it has LEDs to show you where you are on this flipping bastard envelope business. I can't cope with envelopes for some reason, unless it's a simple AD thing. Anything more than that really starts to frustrate the hell out of me. I understand envelopes on a big synthesizer. They work. It goes up, it goes down, pads and stuff. Yeah, we get it. We get it. Or on filters and things like that. But within Eurorack, I struggle tremendously with envelopes in knowing what the heck's going on. Is this firing? Is it not? That Z4000 tip-top envelope, I hate it. I hate it. I would desperately replace it for anything else which is simpler, which doesn't just frustrate the hell out of me by knowing what on earth are these. This is not rocket science. Let's try to make envelopes sexy. And that I respond to that. I think that's helpful. And so the lights that light up to show you where you are on the envelope, genius. I'm into that, completely into that. Also, it has triggers on every stage. So as you get through a stage of the envelope, that sends out a trigger to do other things, which is also interesting. I think it's a sort of module that could actually draw me into the idea of understanding envelopes, because clearly I do not. Now, Vladimir from VPME was there. He had his own stall this time. He wasn't having to carry around a bag of stuff that he kind of stuck under people's noses like he did last year. No, he had his own stall, and he had a couple of modules too. The first one was called Spooky Action, which is another great name. And this is an Ableton Link and MIDI synchronization module. We have seen 1 or 2 of these other Ableton Link modules about, but this one seems to have gone a little bit further in that it has all sorts of configurable CV inputs and outputs. The idea is that it attaches to your Wi-Fi network and will sync up with anything else running Ableton Link. So that could be your laptop running Ableton, or a desktop running Bitwig, or iPad apps running all sorts of apps that are also Ableton Link compatible. And it all just stays in sync. Or you can run multiple spooky actions all over the place to link and sync all of your different Eurorack rows together. It's really very cool. It also includes clock multiples and divisions and also MIDI sync, all just built into the one module. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. The second thing it did was a quad drum module. Now this has got 4 drum sounds built in. It's kind of 4 quadrants of a circle put together on the module where each quadrant controls its own sound, and they all have their own metering and panning and mutes and such like. It looks pretty cool. It's a great way of getting 4 drum sounds within a single module and having individual controls over those without having to go into menus or switch between different bits. And is of course the perfect companion to his Euclidean circles module. Now Hexinverter were there showing the Mutant Brain module while kind of revealing the Mind Phaser module somewhere else. They didn't seem to have one at the show, but they were releasing it at the same time or announcing it at the same time or something. I'm not sure. Anyway, the Mutant Brain is a MIDI to CV converter. This has 16 outputs, 12 of which are triggers, gates, and 4 of which are CV. It has a super easy web interface with which you can assign and configure whatever you want, whatever MIDI you want to be squirted out of CV. You can do it all on this simple interface and then upload it as sysx to the module. It looks like a great, simple and yet versatile solution to the whole getting MIDI into your Eurorack thing. Mind Phaser, on the other hand, is a little bit different. It's all about through zero phase modulation. Now, through zero just means that rather than grinding to a halt when something hits 0, it kind of runs itself backwards again, which gives you a much more smooth experience. But anyway, Mind Phaser is a complex oscillator with carriers and modulators and all sorts of interesting matrix style routing to route through different things and back again and cross-modulating this thing into that thing kind of thing. It has a carrier VCO in the middle which does all the heavy lifting, and then a modulator VCO which then messes with that and then gets messed with back, and then that can get routed through some wave folding, of course, and also through the through zero modulation phasey thing over here. And then everything goes back through the modulation bus and is fed back through the amplitude modulation and the phase modulation and the pulse modulation and the other thing modulation. I'm really not sure if I understand any of it, but it sounds flipping awesome. Another one of my favourite modular makers is Xaoc. They have this kind of wonderfully vintage Cold War vibe going on. I've only actually got the Batumi, which is kind of the least dramatically vintage of their modules, but I could easily fill a whole nother row with their stuff. But the first module was a little bit out of character. It's called the Zadar, or Zadar, 1973, and it's sort of like an ultimate envelope generator. It has a whole load of different wave shapes inside, all bendable and configurable vector-based wave shapes which you can use as envelopes, 4 channels of envelopes. Now these wave shapes can be anything. They can be a traditional ADSR type shape, or they could be just a squiggle of squiggleness, or something that looked like the Taj Mahal, or a mountain range, or something else. And so I guess in some ways it's like a wavetable envelope, because you've got all these wave stuff in there which you can readily select and then apply to whatever you like. I mean, again, this is me not really getting to grips with envelopes, in that the whole point of an envelope is that it's a changing control voltage. So you don't actually have to see it as controlling the amplitude of something as you normally would expect, and you change the volume over time. It doesn't have to be that. You could stick it on whatever you like, onto filter cutoff, onto modulation, onto something else, onto pitch, if you like. And so the Zadar gives you 4 channels of continuously moving control voltage that you can apply to anything that you like. Had this lovely looking screen, and the waveforms just look really very, very interesting. I think for me, for someone who's a bit of an idiot like myself, it just opens up the idea of envelopes into a whole nother realm again. The other one they had was the Odessa, which was an oscillator based on additive synthesis. Now I'm not sure whether we've seen this before, but additive synthesis is all based on harmonics and partials and the mixing and changing and modulation of those in reference to the fundamental. Now I used to have a Kawai K5000 additive synthesizer, and I didn't really understand that one either, because it can be hideously complicated. There are thousands of parameters that you can change and tweak and stuff within additive synthesis. Now what they've done with the Odessa is to kind of condense all of that down to 9 macro knobs. So they've curated the parameters for you, giving you the most interesting things to change. And that, I think, is a genius idea. Otherwise the whole thing would just be far too complex. So you get a lot of instant playability on things like tension and density, warp, and so on. I mean, it looks like an amazing thing. Like all of their modules do, it just has this fantastic vibe going on. And some of the space farts and noises that come out of it are just fabulous. Now, we've been chasing the Camigi around for quite some time. They showed it at NAMM, the odd picture of it's turned up. People talked about, oh, it's the Polycobol, whatever the heck a Polycobol is. But apparently that's what it is. It's a reimagining. It's inspired by this obscure French synthesizer that no one's ever used. But it's a massive synth. Inside, it's all completely analog. It's all based upon 16 of the SEM 3340 oscillators. So you've got 2 per voice, and then discrete SSM 2140 filters. You've got wave shapers, polyphonic aftertouch, MPE, all that sort of loveliness built in, and a massive kind of modulation matrix which lets you wire everything into everything else. Black Corporation are kind of the inverse of Behringer in that they are interested in resurrecting old vintage synthesizers that you just can't get hold of anymore, like the Decars Dream and the CS80, and this is their take on the Polycobol. But they do it in such a way to make it massively expensive. So again, like the Decars Dream, this is going to cost you about $3.5 grand, and it can come as a kit. You've got to build the thing yourself. So they have just this completely different approach to Behringer in resurrecting old synthesizers, and I just find that very interesting. Now, I mentioned last month that IK were going to bring some new hardware to Superbooth. Hardware, oh my goodness. And they did, and they unveiled it, and it's called Uno. Uno, like the card game, I suppose, but this is a monosynth. Hooray, another monosynth. Oh yes. Now it's a plastic looking box with membrane, buttons on it, and a disappointingly small amount of knobs. However, if you give it a little bit of time, it does actually get quite cool. You've got to kind of see it as something like the Corp Volca in being a small box with a stack load of features. It's got a preset engine, so you've got loads and loads of sounds in there. You've got a little keyboard, 2-octave keyboard on the front, and also a sequencer built in, and an arpeggiator, so you can get noise and stuff going around immediately. It has dedicated knobs for the filter, and then these 4 knobs which operate whatever part of that kind of matrix you've got selected. So it's not as immediately hands-on as perhaps it could be, but it doesn't look remotely difficult to use, and it's not really a menu system. It's more of a switching system, which is always fully displayed on the front panel. With a 16-step sequencer, you can store up to 100 patterns, and every step can have 20 different parameters allocated to it. So you could have a completely different sound on every single step. The other thing that's pretty cool is that it sounds great. The 2 oscillators are great. Analog and continuously variable between wave shapes. They morph from triangle into saw into square. They can be independently tuned and independently modulated, and the filter has overdrive. The LFO has 7 wave shapes, including sample and hold, and there's a bunch of cool effects. So it's piss easy to use, there's no complex patching, it instantly plays a bunch of notes so you can tweak it, it's small, battery powered, versatile, neat, unfussy, and under 200 quid. So, you know, knobs aside, it's a pretty great little box. Bastl Instruments announced the ultimate sequential circuits Prophet synthesizer. They're calling it the Prophet X. And is this the Prophet we've been waiting for? No, I don't think it is. It's a rompler. What they've done is they've taken a rompler, like something from Contact, and stuffed it in to a Prophet synth. The idea being that you have all this wonderful, expansive, versatile, complex library of enormous sounds, of atmospheres and whole worlds of stuff that you can then run through a couple of their analog filters and make you feel like you're synthesizing something. I don't know, to me that just feels like something like a Yamaha montage, or it feels like the Nord stage piano or the Kurzweil K2000. This kind of hybrid sampler synthesizer where it's not really a sampler because it doesn't sample, it's just a sample playback system, and the synthesizer side is always dumbed down to make room for the other bit. So I just don't really know who it's for, or do I? I mean, I guess they've made it for all of their sort of rock superstar friends who, when they play on stage, want to have an awesome synthesizer with fantastic piano sounds and fantastic string sounds and fantastic other modulated weirdness coming in, all in the same workstation style keyboard. I just don't think that's the sort of thing that DSI should be doing. And certainly not calling it a Prophet. I mean, you know, the holy grail of Prophet 5, of Pro 1s, of You know, all of these synthesizers are iconic and awesome, and I just feel like they've stuck a General MIDI module in the side of it and think that's innovation. I don't know, I don't get it. They should be doing amazing things. They should be showing people like Behringer and other synthesizer manufacturers how to make amazing synthesizers. I just don't think it's amazing. It's great for what it does, I'm sure. It's not the direction that I wanted sequential circuits to move into. You know, couldn't they just release the coolest, most awesome mono synth ever? Couldn't they do that? Or even a little polysynth. Doesn't have to be a big profit synthesizer, but just something which has edge to it and innovation to it and awesomeness to it, which I know that they have there in that company. And the Prophet X, that's just not it. Not for me, anyway. And finally, we got there, we think, in the end. Now, Moog should have been at Superbooth. They should have been there and they should have shown this keyboard. I think everyone would have gone wild for it. But as it is, they've held it back for Moog Fest, and then it accidentally sort of leaked the week before. So they've kind of lost their thunder on it rather. But as more and more details emerge, it turns out that this is going to be pretty flippin' awesome. It's called Grandmother. I don't know, I've got no comment or opinion on that name, really. Considering they've got the Mother 32 already, I guess this is supposed to be something relating to that, or something old, or a throwback vibe, or something. But I guess the idea is that Moog believed that your grandma was probably a real sort of trippy, hippie chick back in the day, and was probably at Woodstock. And that would explain the vibe and style of the Moog Grandmother synthesizer. Now, a lot of talk on the internet is that, oh my goodness, it's the most awful thing I've ever seen. Oh, it's all sort of Fisher-Price and something you'd get from Radio Shack or something. And I think that's a bit of a shame, because I don't get that vibe at all. For me, it's a reflection of the color they used to have with things like the Moog Source. It's a reflection of modules and fun and adventure and personality and character, which can often be missing from larger manufacturers of synthesizers. And it's definitely a departure, but it's a cool departure as far as I'm concerned. So what am I talking about? Well, the Grandmother is a semi-modular analog synthesizer. It's just a mono synth, but it's done in the style of a modular system. And in fact, all of the components and the internal technology comes from their vintage heritage modular systems, not from their more recent keyboards and synthesizers. And so the sound inside is going to be more like a System 15 than it is going to be like a Moog Fatty or a Mother 32. The layout is very much done in a Eurorack style, with all the patch points exactly where they're supposed to bloody be. Not in some mystical matrix patch-based solution over on the right. No, they're actually next to the parameters that you hope to control, or hope to send control out from. It's got a sequencer and arpeggiator inside with 3 memories, so you can store different patterns. It has a real physical clangable as you bang it around spring reverb. 32-note keyboard, pitch and modulation wheels. I think it just looks great, and it's actually quite huge. I mean, you know, similar as I was saying about the Behringer ones that they did, they made nice big chunky synthesizers. This is exactly that, a big chunky synthesizer. Doesn't have wooden cheeks or anything like that, which is why this is aiming slightly lower in the market, because the price point is $999, so under $1,000, which is a lot perhaps in these days of cheap synthesizers, but it's certainly cheaper than a lot of the other stuff that Moog do. But it certainly does look in the videos like a substantial piece of kit. To begin with, they are making 500, and they're going to be selling them at Moog Fest for a special price of $899 plus you get a free Moog denim jacket. I mean, how awesome is that? I don't know, it's kind of a bizarre piece of marketing, but let's just go with it. It could, of course, herald the start of Moog Eurorack modules. Perhaps, but actually inside it's all on a single PCB, so it's not as if you can automatically take those out and put them into something. It's a single faceplate, it's a single PCB, but it does show that perhaps they are thinking that way. And maybe we will see these in Eurorack modules, and that would be completely awesome. But overall, the Moog Grandmother, for me, looks just fabulous. I love it. I'd love to have a go on one. I think it's a great thing. It's also the sort of thing you could sit in front of a Eurorack system as your sort of main controller and main way in. I mean, I've talked a lot about the Mother 32 being the ideal semi-modular synthesizer to get you into Eurorack. I think the Grandmother could also be that. slightly more expensive, but you do get a keyboard, you get more control and more performance bits and pieces, and it's a better laid out with more modules and more stuff going on and more potential for sound. So if you are looking to get started into modular, then I think the Grandmother could be a really good stepping stone for that. So if I was to pick out a couple of highlights from all of that, and there was a load more stuff that I haven't even got into talking about, but just to pick out a couple of things, I really love the Medusa. I think it's a beautiful synthesizer that they've created there with a very, very interesting interface, which just gives a different spin on things. I love the Endorphin Black Noir thing because I think it's a great drum solution. I need a great drum solution, and that I think could probably be it. I really love the feel and the sound of the Casper Electronics feedback dark matter thingy. But then there's the Instruo stuff and the clang, which it just looks so beautiful. So through all of this, it's really difficult to pick, but I think perhaps the thing that I was affected by most, that created the most discussion for me and the most interest, and I thought, oh, wow, that's just something really different and really special about it. And that was the Elektrofon clang. This simple chord generating module that's just, I don't know, it's just such a different vibe, a different breath, a different way of looking at things. And we need that in Eurorack because there's a danger, I think, of it all going extremely samey or all getting so complex that we just have no idea how to create sound anymore. So a different take from a different sort of way of thinking, I think is brilliant. And we need that. We need more of that. So Elektrofon Klung Rune, if you're out there, good job, mate. It's just a beautifully designed, simple solution to do one thing brilliantly. I'm really looking forward to seeing the clang in action. Oh, and I want a Moog grandmother denim jacket, please. So coming up next is my review of the Erica Synths Graphic VCO. I know we're waiting a long time for that, but sometimes things just take time and they are worth it because it's going to be awesome. Following up from that, I've got the Eventide Euro DDL delay module to do a review of. And then I'm going to do some stuff with plugin Bitwig into the Hermod and seeing what happens with all of that. But if you check out the YouTube channel, you'll find that I'm throwing up videos of this sort of stuff all the time. And of course, as ever, there are lots of updates on the Surface side of things to come. Sorry I wasn't able to do the podcast thing. I will have another look into that at some other point if I can get that working. I don't know, I've just got too much going on, you know. But we did do the live stream and that seemed to work, sort of. After the first 10 minutes of crap of me trying to do something stupid, even though I was live, once we got past that, and once you also got past the crappy sort of quality of the video that I had purposefully selected by accident, because I didn't know you were supposed to select it. Anyway, it was great. We had 2 hours of me just running on about a load of old crap and fiddling around with Eurorack and bits and pieces, but the discussion kind of flowed and it was great. And I'm really grateful to all those people who turned up and participated. Let's do it again. We're going to try it again this coming Sunday. In order to discuss all of this we're talking about now, to discuss Superbooth, to discuss the cool stuff, the terrible stuff, the great stuff, to also fiddle around in Eurorack again. I could make some more noise. Oh, I don't know, whatever you want to bring, we'll talk about it. And if you're not bringing up anything interesting to talk about, I'll just fiddle around with some music for an hour or so. But it was a load of fun and people seem to like it, so let's do it. So that's this Sunday, 20th of May, 8 p.m. British summertime. So that could be, who knows what time that is, anywhere where you may be. So we'll give that a go this Sunday. And remember, if you really want to get in on the action, then do come and join us on Patreon. I've got a bunch of Moltenites on there who are having a lovely time, giving me a lovely time, all having a lovely time together because they're supporting me, and that's awesome. So you can do that too. You can throw me a couple of dollars and I can make more videos more often about more things that you love. Otherwise, if you like what I do, then please share it, throw it around, and get it out there. And in the meantime, go and make some tunes.